Hello everybody and welcome back to another installment from our series Straight from the Horse's Mouth. Today's webinar focuses on Futurity, a young, exciting company which presents wood as a renewable alternative to oil, with its benefits backed up by credible data from an LCA. Here's a sneak preview.
The goal and scope really is a core part of an LCA.
And I'll briefly run you through three main sections where we've really found LCAs to be really advantageous when talking to customers, investors. Nothing's more powerful than having that number that you can then relay to customers and engage with them to showcase that there is a transferable carbon impact. The opportunity is that with growth in the amount of companies that are reaching, that are setting in place net zero and carbon neutral targets, there's about a $13 trillion transition to these commitments that are occurring. So we've seen LCA as a real fundamental tool to enable this transition because that transition to net zero and carbon neutral is all about understanding your impacts.
The LCA took out the guesswork and enabled Futurity to understand the environmental impact of their operations and materials. Another key aspect of an LCA is the ease of communication with potential investors and other stakeholders, which is also covered in this webinar. With that, let's get started.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Outperforming Oil with Trees, Planning a Biorefinery. It's another webinar in our series, Straight from the Horse's Mouth, Insights from Experts in 30 Minutes. Today, we've got a guest speaker, Gaetano Dedual. He's the director and co-founder of Futurity, and he'll share with us how they have used LCA in planning their biorefinery. And now it's just really into the webinar, Outperforming Oil with Trees, Planning a Biorefinery. There is one use of LCA. I haven't quite counted, but I think there are about 101 users of LCA. And we don't really have to wait here until LCA is useful. We've proven for about 50 years that LCA actually can be very useful in a number of different ways. You could almost say it's as useful as baking soda. We all know we can use that for 100 applications, baking just being one of them. And that's similar for LCA. We can use LCA to do product development, strategic planning. It can feed into policy making, marketing, communicating with investors, developing strategies, manage your supply chains. Recently, one of our speakers in a presentation even said, we've used the LCA study to inform our TCFD and modern slavery statements. That is because it looks at the full value chain. So you actually get a lot of information, which means you can use it for risk mitigation, inform circular economy, benchmarking. So I'd be very keen to hear from you in the chat. What other users of LCA have you come across, and where would you use LCA? I'd be really happy if we actually came up with 101 users of LCA. We talk about the users, and the life cycle assessment methodology actually really focuses on how to do it. We all know we need to define our goal and our scope. Why do we want to do it? We need to collect data, that's our inventory. We then assess the impacts, interpret the results, and then almost as an afterthought, the ISO standard actually talks about the application and how can we use LCA. I'd quite like to flip that model on its head and start off with the application. Why do we want to do the LCA? How are we going to apply the results? And if you look at it this way, it becomes quite obvious that the goal and scope really is a core part of an LCA. Quite often if I ask, well, what do you think is the most difficult part of an LCA? It's finding the data, it's knowing the methodologies. I think it's really in the goal and scope definition to get that right. And then later on in the interpretation, to know who the audience is and what all those users of LCA are. I've tried summarizing that a little bit differently here. So if you, for example, focus initially on research and development, you would want to use it for product innovation, to understand trade-offs between different impacts, so carbon being only one of them. You can use it to design for the environment or to steer your whole portfolio towards sustainability. If it's more in marketing, you would want to use LCA to underpin credible marketing claims, like to develop environmental product declarations, to also support your customers with information. Strategy, it can be investment decisions. It can be how to optimize your supply chains. And then lastly, but most importantly, really, it's about stakeholder dialogue, because you actually have the data to talk to your investors. You have the information to talk to policymakers. You can use it in external reporting. This is just a slightly different view on how to use LCA rather than we've done the LCA, we know our numbers, that's it. No, it does go a lot further than that. And a really great example is how Futurity have used LCA. So it's my real pleasure to now introduce Gaetano Dedual, who will talk about how they have used at Futurity life cycle assessment studies. Over to you, Gaetano.
Great, yeah, so thank you very much for that, Barbara, and thank you all for being on this webinar. I'm Gaetano Dedual, CTO and co-founder of Futurity Bio Ventures. So currently, as I'm sure many of you on this call will know, that we have a large consumption of oil on a daily basis, reaching about 10 billion litres. This can be roughly split between 80% going to transport and energy and 20% going into products and materials. The opportunity is that with growth in the amount of companies that are reaching or that are setting in place net zero and carbon neutral targets, there's about a $13 trillion transition to these commitments that are occurring. And what's very interesting in this is that we're seeing that this spans a whole wide range of applications and different industries. So to enable this, we take waste and low-grade wood and process it into three main building blocks of wood. So this is our NC, our cellulose product, our hemicellulose, and our lignin product. Our cellulose product can be applied into composites and rheology, going some way to replace some of the 2 billion litres per day that go into products and materials. Our lignin product can go into foams, resins, and coatings, which also can go some way to replacing some of the 2 billion litres per day in different products and materials. Our hemicellulose stream is converted into biogas and has the ability to provide over 100% of our thermal energy requirement, which I'll talk about a bit later on. So we've seen LCA as a real fundamental tool to enable this transition because that transition to net zero and carbon neutral is all about understanding your impacts. And just to run you through how we've conducted it, we conducted a LCA with thinkstep, looking at the operation of our biorefinery. So where in short, we have consumables and raw logs coming in. So consumables being chemicals and whatnot. And then as outputs, we have wastewater, emissions, and our products. So these products were modeled as raw materials, which are then passed on to our end customers. And I'll briefly run you through three main sections where we've really found LCAs to be really advantageous when talking to customers, investors, and everyone interested within the project. And this is primarily within our allocation of impacts, impact reduction, and our product impacts. So to show you what I mean about allocation of impacts, what you see on the right-hand side is the allocation of where different impacts from the 11 different indicators are sourced from. So what was really interesting with this is we could see that over 60% of all impacts were from upstream activities. So what this enables us to do is, first of all, realize that our on-site impacts are very small in relation to the upstream impacts, and primarily this provides a targeted response if we want to reduce those impacts. So this might look like engaging with suppliers of consumables and finding them from a lower impact source, etc., and it allows us to really direct that. And this all helps us really define what a reduction strategy would look like for the plant. The second scenario and application of this is looking at our impact reduction. So you'll remember in the breakdown of the products that we make, our hemicellulose can be converted into other products as well, but we wanted to investigate what the impact was when we converted that through anaerobic digestion and what that really meant in a life cycle analysis impact. So this first of all showed us that the scenario is very important and that we could have a substantial decrease in our overall net emissions and impacts through utilizing a stream that's already produced through the process to power the whole, to provide the thermal energy requirements for the whole process. And this was replacing natural gas. So the quantification and net effect on emissions profile added value to these streams, because then we could really investigate how much of a cost saving this could also provide us in terms of what future natural gas prices are doing, and where we envisage those to be increasing with the reduction of natural gas production within New Zealand. And all of this provides a lot of de-risking, resilience, and also lowers our impact. So from the study, we could see that essentially all of the markers and indicators for biogas incorporation reduced. The only one that actually increased was our acidification potential, but that was something that was related to the biogas that was modeled in the process. So we would actually expect that to be even lower than what it was indicated, and would be something that once we further our development and have many more results, then we can incorporate into this, so we can continually evolve what this impact might look like. And finally, our third one is our direct product impacts, because nothing's more powerful than having that number that you can then relay to customers and engage with them to showcase that there is a transferable carbon impact, especially when they are integrating it and comparing it to their current incumbents. So because we've assumed that these materials and products go into long-lived applications, we have the ability to demonstrate carbon sequestration. This is really useful when we talk with customers and investors to really showcase what the potential is here. There's obviously a lot of discussion in terms of carbon pricing and how that might be integrated into the future, but demonstrating that this is a very, very low impact and low carbon intensity route for producing materials really helps to reinforce that image that it is a very solid choice and robust to meet carbon neutral and net zero targets. In summary, how this all comes together, it's what we like to call it a sort of transformation equation, where initially we focus on being able to provide commercially competitive manufacturing. So being able to provide materials at a cost that's competitive with the incumbent. So how can we outperform oil on a cost basis? And then we add into that low impact processes, feedstocks and products that are then reinforced for our independently validated results. So that's our LCA. And being able to combine that all provides the ability to outperform oil and go some way to reducing some of the 2 billion litres per day that go into our everyday products and materials. So thank you very much. That was just a quick overview of how we've applied the LCA that ThinkStep has conducted alongside us. So I'm happy to answer any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gaetano. That was really, really interesting. I'll definitely add LCA to inform transition and to accelerate transition to the list of the 101 uses of LCA. One of the questions I have is, have people actually asked you for the LCA information?
Yes. Because as I'm sure you know, your team there at ThinkStep did a very, very comprehensive report. We found what's really useful is taking excerpts from the report and being able to address particular questions. So the one that immediately comes to my mind is on what's your actual on-site impact. So when we're talking with people in regions or people that are interested in what the impact on constructing it might look like, we can go to them and say, well, from the LCA, we've actually got very, very low impacts, and we know what our main impacts are. So can we design, a wastewater facility to reduce those, and how would we target that? And it helps to advance those discussions and help to reduce some of the concerns that people might have around some of those impacts.
So it's about engaging with the local community that you operate in.
Yeah. It provides the foundation to have those discussions to make sure that it's not going to be a hugely impactful process that emits some material, and that's what's really useful with having it independently validated.
Have investors also asked you for the information?
Yes, yeah. So what we're seeing is that it's becoming essentially a necessity now for something of this sort of size and scope of the project, that being able to quantify your impacts and just to showcase that they are low, and that there are strategies there to reduce what impacts you might have, I think is really fundamental, and has been a question that we've nearly received every time.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you. James has a question. Thank you, Gaetano. He says, could you provide an overview of where Futurity is in terms of product development, first customers, capital raising, etc.?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll keep it quite brief, just to make sure we can address all the other questions. But and we're with product development. We have engaged. We've done our first round of product development and engaged with a number of companies onshore and abroad, looking at integrating our lignin and cellulose into their end products. So that's everything from cellulose reinforcement, cellulose as a rheology modifier, and lignin-based foams, and have been really, really happy with the feedback that we've received from those materials. And currently, we're in the process of raising, in our capital raise, to raise about $7 million to then upscale that and progress that even further, with the idea being that upon scaling up and getting to a point of validation, that we can begin to work through some supply and contract agreements to really validate and de-risk the construction of the biorefinery. So that would be working towards some of the first customers, and then subsequent capital raises, etc., to get to that point.
Someone else wants to know, what are some examples of Futurity product applications?
So yeah, we briefly touched on in that flow diagram. So it's quite well defined. So we had a range of different applications that we looked at, and basically whittled that down to 5 different core product application areas that we're really focusing this on. So that was a piece of work that we did to really concentrate what were some of the most commercially viable applications. First of all, financially, where could we provide cost savings? And then on top of that, where could we provide performance savings? And then on top of that, where could we provide carbon reduction or emission reduction savings? So by cultivating all those 3, we identified the likes of rheology modification, reinforcement, foams, resins, and adhesives for our products, and will be what we're focusing on throughout our application development stages.
Thank you. Kanika would like to know, are you making more bio-based plastics or totally new product?
Yeah, so what's fundamentally different in our approach, say, in comparison to traditional bio-based materials that have been developed, is that we're looking at providing the raw feedstock to replace oil. So, for example, in a polyurethane resin, so in a foam product, we replace one of the oil components, which is a polyol, which makes up about 40% of a polyurethane foam. So we are not actually bioplastics manufacturers. We produce the precursors or feedstocks to produce those end products, and that's where we see the huge market, because there's a really significant amount of oil that actually goes into that a lot of the time people aren't aware of.
We often also get questions from startup companies saying, should we really do an LCA, and where do we start? What is the hardest part? Are you able to provide some advice here from your experience?
Yeah, the hardest part is a hard one, because I think when we first approached it, it was always on the agenda for us. We knew that we needed to conduct an LCA because it was going to be very fundamentally important to be able to engage with our customers. And always pinned it up as something that when we were at the stage to do so, that was going to be a key piece, so that we could have those numbers, and that we were able to do a quick calculation to show, yep, we can save you somewhere in between X and Y% of your carbon, and reduce the impacts here and there in your supply chain. I think with that being said, one of the challenges I imagine would be for a startup would be looking at how being at the position where you're confident enough with the modeling and how you envisage the process to unfold. We've had very good support from our technology suppliers and contracted modelers to help us develop that. So we're very happy with how that is, and we've got a very strong understanding of what all of our consumables are, what the impacts of those are, what the waste streams look like, etc., and what scale they're all on.
Having said that, though, you've also mentioned that you did use LCA for your scenario development. So if you were at an earlier stage, you could probably use it to test some of the assumptions as well. So I think there are those both aspects, but
yeah.
Well, that's really good. It's interesting to hear that you've always had the plan. So when do you know, yep, we're ready now to do the LCA? Was there a certain level in your development of the company that you said, yep, now we're ready to go, or what was the trigger?
Yeah, I think that that point really came when we were happy with the process. We had a good grasp on it, and we said, we were confident that We had a very in-depth understanding of what was consumed, how much, what the intensity of it was, and what the products that we were targeting were going to be. And once we had that established, we were happy to be able to begin that. And also on top of that was aligning that so we had it ready before we were seeking investment, I think was the other critical timing consideration.
Thank you. Ruben would like to know, hey Gaetano, what are the biggest sources of carbon reductions from your products, compared to a petrochemical equivalent, given both are inert and unlikely to become atmospheric CO2?
Yeah, so that in a case like that, the major benefit is because we use wood as a feedstock, that there is a lot of upstream carbon sequestration that comes from that. So you already start with a very low impact raw material as opposed to oil as the precursor to that, and that helps really fundamentally change the dynamics on those calculations.
For me, I think the key takeaways really from your case study are that you had 3 uses. One was to use LCA in the transition, but then the results specifically to communicate with your local communities so that you could say what the local impacts are. And then the critical piece, as my takeaway, is that you really needed the information, and you called it a necessity for conversations with investors. That I think is a key learning that also other startups or other growing companies really can take away. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I have to say, it was a pleasure working with you on the project as well. So we're always very keen to be involved in those exciting new development type projects. We have a few more webinars coming up, one on TCFD, one on science-based targets, and another one on a different use of LCA, and that is LCA and planetary boundaries. How can we combine the two? We also still are looking for quite a few people, so check out our website and generally get in touch, especially if you have a topic that you'd like us to cover in a future webinar. Thank you very much again, Gaetano, and I wish you all a wonderful afternoon.